Welcome into a special edition of the Husker247 Podcast, a holiday edition, a July 4th edition, a fireworks edition, a Groin Kicks edition. I am Mike Schaefer, joined by 1620 The Zone's Josh Peterson, one of the co-hosts of Unsportsmanlike Conduct, also moonlights as a content creator for the I-80 Club, in which the content that he has chosen to create this summer just leaves you with that feeling in your stomach like you want to vomit, but you can't sit down. You can't alleviate that sort of disgusting pressure in your lower part of your bowels and your stomach. You just feel like dry heaving even. That's what Josh wants to talk about today. So, Josh, tell us about that feeling and why you're so addicted to it.
Well, first of all, Shafe, thanks for having me. I love joining you on this holiday. You know, my wife is like, I thought we were going to spend time together. And I said, no, dear, I'm recording a podcast on Independence Day because that's how I roll.
But we're recording this well before July. I don't want anyone
April right now, everybody. Can you believe this weather? It just snowed recently.
I don't want anyone to think that I would pass up sitting on a lake somewhere right now on July 4th so I could have a podcast talking about Nebraska football. I don't want to give the wrong impression.
Okay. All right. Theater of the mind.
I'm a diehard, and I feel like I'm pretty solid at my job, and I care, but I don't know that I care to that level.
Fair.
So this has been recorded before actual July 4th, but pretend like it is July 4th.
Yes, but no, in all seriousness, I appreciate you having me on. The Groin Kick Chronicles has been very much a labor of love since Jack and I came up with the idea to do this back in November. We were doing the post-game show, Shafe, following the Nebraska-USC game, and Jack started off the pod like 2-3 minutes in, and he was like, Josh, I want to tell you why this is the personification of the groin kick era. And he kind of laid out all these reasons. It had back-breaking turnovers. It had referees making bad calls. It had a no call on the literal last play of the game. It had, them pulling you. It had all sorts of things, right? Almost turnovers, almost takeaways where Nebraska doesn't get it. And it got this idea going in my head of, okay, what if we were to look at this era of football? First of all, when would it begin? And then if you could actually mathematically rank the losses, what would be the worst loss of this era? And so that's where the kernel of the idea came from. Kind of sat on it, didn't do anything with it. Started writing a prologue in January, and then really kicked things into high gear in March to try to do something different and more unique maybe than I personally at my job or with the podcast with the I-80 Club have ever done. And so we're a few weeks into the releases, and it's really been interesting and, dare I say fun, even though I know that now I can't beat the allegations of being a Husker hater if I say this project has been fun. But it has been. It's been very enjoyable, at least in the putting everything together standpoint.
When did you kind of know that you had something here? Like you said you were writing the prologue. I'm sure it wasn't until after that. Maybe it wasn't until you were recording some of the stuff that you felt like this is really going to resonate with at least a slice of Nebraska fans. I mean, it's not going to be everybody, but there's definitely going to be people that will appreciate the level of effort put into reliving the nightmarish last decade. Really? Doesn't quite go the full decade, right? But
it starts it's
2017.
No, it starts with the USC bowl loss.
Oh, yeah, it does go the decade then.
Yeah. Because we decided, I'll answer your question in a second, but we decided that game because in the game beforehand, and this is something you have covered before, Nebraska has their last overtime first down point win when they beat Iowa in Bo Pelini's last game. And I've always thought that is a great dividing line. Part of it, too, is Bo is fired, and so I know a lot of people view the sins of the last decade as like God cursing Nebraska football for what's happened. But I always thought that was a really good kind of, beginning. And then, I mean, dude, that 2015 season is chock full of just heartbreak, week after week after week. And so to answer your question though, when I knew, so, I started writing it. I didn't know if I had anything good. I'm not a writer. I have started writing, so maybe I am a writer. I don't know if I'm a good writer is what I would say. I have a voice, I know how to talk on the air. And so I thought it was coming together well. It's very well. I think it's well researched. I've gone and, back game by game by game. And I had a meeting because we ended up hiring a producer, Jack and I did, named Ian Alio, and he composed music for this. He's recorded everything that we have done. And I had lunch with him and explained the idea. And he thought that it was really unique and different. And I said, okay, good. So I'm starting to think like, okay, maybe this is becoming something. As I really finish up the writing process, I thought that I had something. And going through the recording the day where him and I did every written part of it that I wrote, all the scripted stuff. So every episode is essentially half scripted, half conversation with Jack and myself. And I thought going through that, I asked him, we took a break at one point. We would probably do 10 games and then we would take a break. And I said, is this good? Do you like this? And he, and look, maybe he's just blowing smoke, but I don't think he is. He was like, it's really good. I really am enjoying it. And I said, okay, good. But Shafe, ultimately the answer, and this is the longest way to say, when did I realize it? I had lunch with Jack and his son, Johnny, at some point around the recording with Ian. And we ended up talking, because we explained the project to Johnny. We ended up talking about it for an hour because he was like, well, what about this game? And what about this game? And it was a reminder to me, like my fandom and how I am as a fan and why this project is ultimately not me like thumbing my nose at Nebraska, but it's more wow, like you don't understand the pain of Husker fans. It's kind of like the thesis of the project from Jack's perspective has been other people who are fans of other organizations or programs or franchises. They don't get it because it's actually been worse than they could imagine. And talking about it with Johnny that day and not celebrating, but more, wow, what about when this play happened? Or what about when this game happened? What about when this play happened? It was a great reminder of, okay, I think this is going to connect with people because I know as a Cowboys fan, I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face about the most heartbreaking losses of my lifetime, and I think that Nebraska fans who look back at this last decade as, how in the world has this happened? I'm hoping that this kind of scratches the itch, of trying to figure it out, what the through line is of the last decade.
There's a lot in there. There's, I was just thinking you'd be like, oh yeah, we started recording. I was like, oh, this sort of sadness resonates with people, but no, it went beyond that.
I gave you 4 minutes.
I appreciate it. This project is a total labor of love. Like that's what I don't know that people understand. If they think that you came from this from let's highlight how bad Nebraska's been because it'll be sort of comical. It's darkly funny in like a black humor kind of way, but it comes from a place of like, this is a team that I and the people around me spend 340 days a year. And I don't know why I'm picking 25.
Yes.
But let's just say there's 25 days a year where you're not thinking about Nebraska football. But I don't even think that's true. It's probably
I think about them every day.
Yeah, I mean, I actively try not to think about them, but doing that means you're thinking about them. So
correct.
It's this program where it means everything to so many people, and we have seen so many different iterations. And this is what Nebraska has to do to be successful. And they got to go recruit Texas again, and they got to go do this, they got to go do that. It is almost breathtaking looking at the numbers of it, but hearing you talk through the scenarios of how the games play out and the way that you sort of set this up. You list the game, you walk through the game, you tell us about a moment where things went poorly for Nebraska that really kind of stands out during it. If there's a big performance or an injury or a takeaway, that's thrown in there too. It just kind of reminds you, like, we've seen lots of people try to fix this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we've seen a lot of different styles or attempts to go about it. We've been in positions where it seemed like Nebraska was pulling themselves out of this funk that they've been in, only to find themselves back in it. And not only back in it, but somehow deeper in the hole than they were before they thought they were getting out of the funk. So it comes from a really kind of fascinating place. And I think the production value of this is really, really good. I mean, it's a total labor of love. I hope people take the time to listen through it. I know when I was listening to the very first episode, and you and Jack were kind of going through at the end of it, talking through some of those games, it does stand out like, oh wow, 2018 Ohio State, like that one you would think would be an ultimate groin kick. But because of the sort of year that had already played out at that point, and the type of game that Nebraska found itself in, and everything else, a game that's really memorable for a variety of reasons. Just sitting here, I can think of Nebraska, the fumble from Adrian Martinez that doesn't make any sense down by the goal line. The ball that you think J.D. Spielman lost in his eyes, in the sun, lost in the sun with his eyes, that would have put Nebraska up by 14, I think, at that
by
point
2 scores.
in time.
Yep.
I want to say that there was a really nice catch by Stanley Morgan as they were sort of scrambling to try to come back late in the game. That clearly the hit from JoJo Domann to Dwayne Haskins that separated him from the football, that kind of announced JoJo Domann as a player.
Yeah.
All of that, and that sits at number like 65, 66.
Yeah, it's on the very first
list.
episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I think, that was the part that game was 62. That was the part I thought that was super, super fun with Jack was, so to take people into the formula, this was Shafe. The hardest part of this whole thing was, what is the formula? My initial idea was a 1 to 10 scale, 10 categories, where the ultimate maximum worst game could be a 100 in theory, or at the very least closest to it, and then, further and further on down. Ended up settling on 7 categories. And so the 7 categories are, a couple of like obvious easy ones. The margin of loss, margin of victory for the opposition, total yard disparity. We wanted to make sure we built in like rivalries, so a loss to Iowa should hurt more than a loss to Purdue, right? So we wanted to build that in. We wanted to make sure that we acknowledged losses we used Bill Connolly's SP Plus rankings end of season. A loss to like a bad team is worse than a loss to a good team, but maybe not, a super big gap. And then we needed some math in there in terms of, those graphics where it's like, hey, they had a chance to win, and then it just plummets. So we did max second half win probability, post-game win probability, and we Stu Manji, who Husker fans who listen to this, most of them undoubtedly have seen his stuff on Twitter, because he's the guy who has the Excel sheets that are just like of the saddest stuff possible. He built this thing where it was 4 plays in the fourth quarter that were a late game shift, is kind of what we described it as, and we did the cumulative number. And so, like, for example, that 2018 Ohio State game that we were just talking about, the late game shift of that is minus 29.6%, which is actually not that bad. Like, for example, the BYU game, the late game shift of that one is minus 142.1%. Now, part of that is because one play was...
Yeah, you were winning until the last play of the game.
It was a 90% shift that happened on one single play. So that was kind of what we did there. And so, I go into this thing with all sorts of preconceived notions about what game's going to be number 1, what games are going to be in the top 10. The thing I was most interested in was, what is going to be last? What will be the most palatable loss in the last decade of Nebraska football? And it oddly ended up being another Ohio State game, the 2021 loss, which I never would have guessed that. I never would have guessed it. But because of the way that, again, the math of it, the formula worked out that it ended up not being that horrible of a loss. It had a 24.43 groin kick rating, as we've described it, out of 70 points. The 2018 game we were just talking about was 28.46. But as we, yesterday, the most recent episode came out, and that was the 50 through 41 category, which is actually, it was 50 through a tie for 40th. And like, there are some really bad losses in there, and I'm still like, oh my gosh, we haven't even gotten to like the ones that truly represent all of the pain of this last decade. Like, we really start hitting those in the top 30. And there was a couple, I always give Jack the sheet of paper at the end of an episode to say, like, here's what we have coming up next, because he knows nothing. He does not know what the rankings are. And there was a couple when he looked at that and was like, are you serious? Like, this game is like 26. Like, that is impossible. How is it, that low?
because there's that many losses to get through and that many one-score possession defeats and
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera. As you went through this, did you see any like real commonalities, just things that, the higher it was going to score, it was largely because Nebraska did X or, things of that nature? Like, as you just sort of looked at the data, did you see anything that just jumped out right off the bat?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that people will see as we get higher and higher is the teams that we view as rivals are near the top, right? So, for example, the way that we did the team formula, it was half of their SP Plus ranking and half of it was the rivalry score, if you will. And so so that means you have one category where it's 1 to 5 and one where it's 1 to 5, and those combine for a 10, right? So we gave a perfect 5 score to 3 teams: Colorado, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Those teams were a 5. We gave a 4 score to Miami, Oklahoma, Minnesota. Can't remember if there was another one in there. All that to say, like, the higher we get, you're going to see a lot of the Wisconsins, the Minnesotas, the Iowas of the world, partly too, Shafe, because they've had some really depressing losses to those teams, right? So the interesting thing then, offshooting that, is you see the non-rival teams show up near the top, and it really does help explain, like, oh yeah, that 2018 loss to Northwestern was like an all-timer. And if they were a rival, like if they did that to Iowa, it would have, maybe, not to give it away, but maybe that game is the number 1 worst loss of all time. And so the BYU game is a lot higher than it would be otherwise, because the team score, it was a 1 out of 5. But because of all of the other data that goes into that game, it ends up getting pushed near the top. And so that was interesting. Like, there were chunks, and I mean, you've seen this now in the first few episodes that come out. There are chunks of Ohio State games where it's like Ohio State, Ohio State, Ohio State, because honestly, Shafe, like in 2017, in 2019, they played essentially the same game against the same team. A great team in SP Plus ranking, the same rivalry scores it always is. Ohio State out yardage Nebraska by a similar number. They beat them by a similar score. And so it was funny that you end up having a tie between 2 Ohio State games because it basically was the same game. That said, like, the 62-3 game, like we had a bell curve where like a loss by 3 points is a 10, right? But we did make sure to put real horrible losses. Like, we wanted to make sure that those were a little bit higher as well. And so when we get into the top 30, there are 4 blowouts that are in the 21-30 range. And people are going to see why, because, I mean, they are probably the most memorable blowouts or unmemorable blowouts of this era, where it's like all these one-score games and then the 62-3 loss to Ohio State is in there, for example.
Did you have a way to factor in sort of the context of the moment too? So when you talk about that BYU game, does it deserve more emphasis on the fact that it was the start of the Mike Riley era? Or when you look at Minnesota 2023, like Matt Rule's very first game as Nebraska's head coach features a fumble when you're trying to salt the game away and a toe tap that's still inconceivable no matter how many times I watch the replay of the game-winning touchdown from Minnesota. Like, is there any way to that you could have put context into it, or is this all just strictly kind of the added context of how you choose the rivals numbers or the math that you assign to the point differential? Is there any human context that you can sort of add into that?
Yes, there is. Yep. So the stuff that we were just going through was the opponent rating, but we built in this other factor called game importance. And so what we were trying to do was essentially figure out, how do you, okay, for the example, the end of the 2023 season, the loss to Iowa to finish that year should not just be painful because you lost to Iowa. It shouldn't just be painful because you lost by a field goal. It shouldn't be painful because you had the ball at the 50-yard line and somehow lost in regulation in the last minute. It should also be painful because it was the 4th straight loss that meant that they didn't go to a bowl game. And so we built in a 1 to 10 scale called game importance. And so a season opening loss was a 4 out of 10 for us on that scale. We wanted to give it importance, but it's still the first game of the season, right? So it's not the absolute maximum. The absolute maximum was a 4th loss in a row when trying to reach bowl eligibility, which, it goes into existence with that game. And so we did that, Shafe, where a third straight loss when trying to reach bowl eligibility, overtime losses had a higher score because they should in this era. And so that was the context that we tried to provide to, really a lot of stuff with like losing streaks. Like, for example, the Northwestern loss in 2018 we talked about a few minutes ago. That game has a game importance thing built in because it was the 6th consecutive defeat to start the regular season. So I was pretty proud of that one. I can't remember if that was Stu Manji or one of the other guys that really helped, Matt and Jordan. Those guys did incredible work with the Google Sheets, and they know how to work this website, and I'm not very good at it, and they helped build the formula. And that was an idea that one of those three came up with that I really, really liked because I thought that it helped add some context to the games, kind of like what you were just mentioning.
Have you considered putting together, now that you've done all of this, you've went back through these games, I'm sure you've researched, a meticulous level of it. Have you put together an all groin kick opposing team where you have like the quarterback that just rips your heart out, the running back who has the big moment or the last second touchdown, the punt returner from Michigan State who houses that kick, Iowa's kicker, one of the 17 years that they've won on a last-second field goal, the guy who intercepted the pass against Chubba Purdy, things of that nature. Have you considered putting together an all-groin kick team?
No, I have not, but that is an amazing idea. I will say this. The first player that I thought of when you mentioned this was Jonathan Taylor because he rushed for 200-plus yards in every game he ever played against Nebraska. So he finished his career with probably between 600 and 700 yards. I don't have the number in front of me right now. He, I think, is now he did it in blowout wins. That the games were never close. It was a 21-point win, a 17-point win, and like a 19-point win. Like all of the games were comfortable victories by the Badgers. But golly, man, like there's, we towards the very end of every little game capsule, we have an unmemorable play. And I got the most recent episode sent to me last night by Ian to just listen through it. And I was reminded yet again that in that 2018 game, there was like one part of the second half where it was like, ooh, could this game be interesting? And then he had like an 80-something yard touchdown run, and it was like, nope, never mind. And he did that against them in 18. He did it against them in 19, and he did it against them in 2017. That guy, I remember when he showed up thinking, wow, he might be the best of all the Wisconsin running backs, of this era. And, I think I still feel that way close to a decade later.
I think Nate Stanley is the quarterback for the groin kick era.
Oh, God.
He had the two. I mean, if Iowa is factored to that high of a degree because of the rivalry rating, and then it's the last game of the season, and then I don't know where it's going to fall on the list, but 2019 Iowa has to be, to me, a top 10 loss in groin kick era discussions. He's the quarterback in that. He led the comeback in that. He was the quarterback in 2018. They won that game in overtime.
They got the fourth down late in that game.
Yeah, he's arranged multiple drives to set up, the game-winning kicks. Like I don't. There's probably other people, but first blush, the quarterback to me of the groin kick team is Nate Stanley. Like
that's a good one. Yeah, I'm looking at the other.
The first one that I can think of where it's like, okay, this really kind of fits for me here.
Yeah, I'm looking at the other quarterbacks on the list, and I think that that's a good one, mainly because, like, honestly, Shafe, I mean, there's not a whole lot of guys that kind of beat him 2 years in a row or 3 years, right? Like, It's college football has just been so different now. Like JT Barrett shows up a couple times on the list, but, like, Ohio State absolutely rolled Nebraska in 2016 and 2017, so it doesn't really matter that much. So yeah, that's a good one if you were doing the all quarterback team of who would be at the top on the groin kick stage.
Well, and then I think Peyton Ramsey would have two different appearances on entirely different games, but somehow both just devastating in their own stupid ways with Indiana and Northwestern. So he's someone else that I had thought of. But yeah, I actually think it'd be kind of fun if you go through and you kind of put together the all groin team. And then maybe you can make an actual graphic and then send it to their social medias and go from there. Like
email an SID at Iowa. Hey, congratulations! I wanted to let you know that one of your former quarterbacks is on the all groin team. What the hell is this? Move to spam folder. Never again will I receive an email from Josh Peterson again.
Oh man, your graphic is just this trophy of a bronzed cup and a foot going into it or something, and the cup has like the football seams on it or something.
You're always the idea man.
I think it's a wrap to go. But I was trying to think of who would be on it. Obviously, Iowa is a team that is probably the from the team context, I don't know that they can get a lot worse in terms of what Nebraska's experienced. It's funny because I was surprised 2017 Iowa hasn't appeared or didn't appear in that first grouping. Like that game had no value whatsoever in Nebraska football's history. It was a meaningless contest where they weren't going to be able to make a bowl game. The coach was already going to be fired. And no one cared in that game. Like more people were interested in what was happening with UCF and USF at the same time than Noah Fant just destroying and demolishing Nebraska at the end of 2017. That's one of the few games where it's like this. I think that to me should have probably been in the first episode, but I'm curious where it falls on your list overall. Can you share that? Is that too much of a spoiler?
Well, I'll say this, Shafe. I teased a few minutes ago that as we get into the top 30, there are 4 blowout losses. That is going to make an appearance inside of the top 30.
That's why. See, I just don't know that that's as big of a groin kick of a loss.
So where the math helps that game climbing really high. I mentioned the bell curve earlier. Blowout losses are able to climb up. That is one of the few blowout losses that reaches a threshold because they lost by 42 points. We made that like kind of the threshold of the number needs to be bumped up even higher. And so that's in there. The other thing is, the opponent rating, if I remember right, it's a good Iowa team, but it's also Iowa. And so that's going to help. And then game importance, finishing the regular season with another loss was a reason why. Oh wait, just a sec, Shafe. I was looking at a different one, though. All of the numbers are pretty much the same thing. But yeah, so that's pretty much why. Oh, here was the other part though. The total yard disparity of that game ends up bumping it up really, really high because not only does Iowa outgain Nebraska, they outgain them to an unnecessarily large degree, and so that ends up working against Nebraska.
Were there any games where you kind of needed to go back and watch clips because you just had no memory of the loss for Nebraska?
Probably 3 or 4, which I don't know if that's an inordinately high number or an inordinately low number. The 2014 USC game, which is the first game of this era, was the one that, dude, I was at the game. I had like no memory of anything actually inside of it. I forgot that it came down to Nebraska.
It was actually a very entertaining game.
Yeah, 45-42, Nebraska.
Very entertaining game.
So that one, there was I think a couple of the Purdue losses, not the 2019 Purdue game, of course. That game is horrific. But the 2018 Purdue game, I remember that more for it's a winnable game than I remember anything that actually happened inside of the football game.
Got suspended, I think, because of that game.
Yeah, and then, the 62-3 loss, the thing that I remember most is Tommy Armstrong getting concussed. But I don't remember and Joe Burrow scored late, I think, right? I don't remember anything inside of it. Part of it, Shafe, I had a few beers that night, and I watched a lot more of the LSU-Alabama game as the game went on because it was just so bad. So most of the games I had a really good memory of, though I would say this, man, going through some of the Matt Rule era is actually a whole lot worse than I kind of have really thought about. Going into year 3, which we talked about on the podcast earlier this week, just kind of the vibes going into year 3. And I had forgotten, I knew that the end of the Wisconsin game in 2023 was bad. I'd forgotten that they were in the 25 with a minute 40 to go, and they had all 3 timeouts, and they just totally butcher everything that follows because it was a response to what they did wrong in the previous week against Maryland. So that was really interesting. The Matt Rule era has been what it is so far. Honestly, it's been good homework for the upcoming season for me in that regard. Also, one more thing, that 2015 season was somehow even worse than I remembered it. 2021 gets all the hype, and rightfully so. They went 3-9 and they lost every game by one, by double digits, 8 games by 1 score. But dude, they came back in 3 or 4 of them to make it a 1-score game. 2015 has some all-timers. The BYU game that we've talked about a couple of times, the Miami overtime
OG,
loss. And
Wisconsin.
then, dude, Illinois, Wisconsin is back-to-back weeks, that happens. And that's some real garbage that happens in those 2 games. So, it was – I can't believe, first of all, that's been almost 10 years, that the Mike Riley era started 10 years ago. But it was the surprises sometimes along the way were, oh man, that's right. Like they really should have won that game. And I don't know how many times I said that in the project, probably like 80 times.
And they didn't.
And they didn't.
They're Nebraska. And this project wouldn't exist if they did.
Yeah. So shout out to Nebraska for all the losses and giving us something to do. I hope that, look, I want to say this, and I don't care to defend the work from the, like Josh wants the program to fail and whatever. But like, this has been an insane era of Husker football. And it has been, really interesting going back through it and just seeing how the program has gotten here. And I mean, in a way, like, I do think there is some solace, Shafe, to take that they have lost in such inexplicable ways that, like, why can't they turn it around? And so I hope you said some kind words at the start. Like, it is dark, right? It's a dark period. I try to add some humor and levity because that's how I operate as a sports fan. But at the very least, I hope that people appreciate the craft that's gone into it. Ian Alio has done an insane job on this. He scored the music for it. He's not a video editor, and he's editing all these things together. And I think what he has churned out for our YouTube page is great. Mike Stibbs helped out as well, my former producer on Unsportsmanlike Conduct. And then, the thing we haven't mentioned is every game has an accompanying Jack Mitchell tweet, and getting him to reread each and every one of those was one of the funniest half hours of the year for me so far, just watching him. And also, Jack, he'll type things and there's a lot of mistakes with grammar and words. And he's been reading some of these and he's like, what was I trying to say here? Which is just like super, super funny. So I hope that people have at the very least appreciated the time and effort that's gone into the project.
Yeah, well, I hope that they've appreciated it too. Like I said, it's a labor of love. Like, that's what I don't think people who just assume that you're doing it to poke fun at the lack of success understand. Like, this isn't just someone who's having a laugh at a football program. Like, you're going deep into the belly of the beast here to try to suss out what went wrong, why it went wrong, and did we learn anything from it? Do you feel like you've learned anything about the previous coaches? Like, wading through all of Mike Riley and Scott Frost's losses? Like, were there some overarching takeaways that you now have about those coaches that maybe weren't there before? Or was it just more confirmation of how you felt in the moment, whether it be 2017 or, in your case, I think 2020 for Scott Frost?
Oh, yeah, I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So, like, I mean, I'll say this, man, and Jack and I, we just released a bonus episode earlier this week about the Akron game that never was in 2018. And, of course, that's become this giant what if. What if they played the game? Do they win? What happens next? And I do wonder often, like, sports, the analytic dorks will say momentum is not a real thing. Momentum is obviously a real thing, especially over the course of a season, right? Like, something bad happens and you think, wow, will that team ever be able to recover from it? You're a huge NBA guy. The Knicks losing game 1 to the Pacers of the Eastern Conference Finals in such a groin kick fashion, right? I in that moment, I thought there's no way they're going to win the series. If they win game 1, do they win the series? I don't know, but they never really had the opportunity to because they lost that game. And so I use that as a way to kind of backdoor into years 1 of Mike Riley and year 1 of Scott Frost. And I mean, dude, what happens if the BYU game ends with, Nate Gary knocking down the pass and Nebraska suddenly 1-0? I mean, suddenly they're 1-0 instead of 0-1. What happens differently that season? I think that year, that team, it was a toxic environment around here, given that Bo Pelini was, beloved by a lot of folks and was fired. If they give permission in a way to believe in Mike Riley, because look, they were down at the half. They had a great start to the second half. They take the lead. They hold on to win. Is there more buy-in in the locker room? Perhaps. Is there more buy-in from the fan base? I would say inexplicably yes, or undoubtedly yes, rather. And I would say the same thing about 2018. They lose that Colorado game in, such a weird, strange way, and then it just snowballs. Adrian Martinez is hurt. They lose to Troy. And suddenly, Jack said it when we did the Akron pod. If they beat Akron and they beat Colorado and they beat Troy, suddenly they're 3-0. And, like, is it going to change the whole era? Spoiler alert, I said I don't think it would have, but I can't I understand when somebody would say that they think that was the difference between the Scott Frost era being a success or failure. And I feel the same way about 2015 for Mike Riley. And so ultimately, maybe the lesson is man, they've gotten off to just such strange starts. And if Matt Rule's able to kind of pull this thing out, given that their first season, as you'll see when we get closer to the top, features some all-time just dumb losses. You talked about the Minnesota one a few minutes ago. That 4-game losing streak to finish up the season was, insane, especially the last 3 games. Even last year they lost 5 games by a score, and the 2024 Iowa loss, again, spoiler alert, is going to be really high on the list. So, if he's able to do it, I guess he's going to kind of buck the trend. Maybe that's the takeaway, is this is kind of trending towards, what the previous coaches have done, at least in their first 2 years or so.
Well, that's not a trend that we would like to see continue.
No. Are we ending another podcast on a dour note like we did earlier this week?
Probably. I don't see a lot of ways to end it on a super positive note, given what's being discussed.
Sure.
I personally am sitting here wondering the game, and this because I've talked to you about it. It's, for me, sort of the first real thought imprint on my brain that this wasn't going to work with Scott Frost, because there was so much that was happening that was inexplicably bad. But then I wonder, it's going to lack the context to properly land in probably the top 15 or even top 20. 2019 Purdue is the sort of loss that just I will think of just at random, that Darian Daniels got the ball to inside the 3-yard line and Nebraska didn't score a touchdown on that. I will think of Aiden O'Connell when I'm watching Sunday Ticket and he's playing for the Raiders, and his first real college football experience was driving at 80-some yards and finishing with a touchdown to beat Nebraska on that Saturday. A game in which Nebraska so thoroughly dominated the first quarter that it could have been up 28-0, and yet was only up 10 or 14-0. And I may or may not have had first quarter points that I had bet on that day that they did not hit. And I was just irate over the gambling loss of it, let alone what I was watching. It's just, so part of this project to me is there are certain games that I view in one light that I'm always going to be fascinated how it comes up. 2016 Wisconsin should be a top 5 loss to me, because Nebraska was undefeated at that time. It effectively started the end of their 2016 season, which almost feels like it started the end of the entirety of Mike Riley. But I don't know that will be represented in that same way. And so I, like everyone else listening to this, will be sort of waiting to see, all right, is 2020 Iowa a top 10 loss in a year that really, I think we all just kind of want to forget that college football season anyways? It's going to be kind of fascinating going through some of that. I did think, we didn't touch on this a lot, I do think the COVID year, there's a part of me that almost feels like you just need to throw that out. And yet at the same time, there's some losses in there that are going to rank pretty highly because of just the context surrounding it and the fact that they kept losing in those situations.
Yeah, the highest ranked a COVID game is coming up in our next episode, which will come out next week as we get into.
It didn't get too high, but it got into the top 40.
It got into the top 40. So that'll be the final appearance by a COVID game, which I think is fair. Though I will say this, Shafe, I couldn't believe that the 2020 Illinois loss and the 2020 Minnesota losses were as low as they were with the math. But, the math is what the math is, so I'm not going to argue with it too much. I think I'll say this. I think you're going to be a little disappointed in how low the Purdue game is. Low as in not towards the top, of the entire list. But one stat that I have in the script from that one, only one time in their first 10 drives did Nebraska fail to get into Purdue territory, yet after 10 drives, they trailed 17-13. I think that is the perfect encapsulation of how stupid that game was, because they absolutely dominated. And while you had first quarter points, I had, I believe, first half points and overall game points. And it's one of the last games that I bet on, honestly. So maybe that's the game that sent me away from sports betting.
Yeah, that ended gambling for you.
Yeah, that was a horrible experience for all parties involved. That was, for me, it wasn't the canary in the coal mine. My first doubt started really happening in the loss to Colorado to start the season. And then the Minnesota game in October was one where I was like, okay, what in the world is happening? But that one was bad. That one was obviously bad.
Yeah. And then I think they followed it up with Indiana And then, it's just off to the races at that point.
Yeah.
So
Indeed.
Good old Nebraska football.
Yeah.
Always something to discuss. Josh, where can people, I can't believe we haven't done this. Where can people listen or watch these podcasts?
Appreciate you asking, Shafe. Every regular episode is available in the I-80 Club podcast feed. So wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's on Apple or Spotify, I'm an Overcast man myself. We're available there. New episodes drop on Thursday mornings, bright and early. So unless you wake up before 4 a.m., every episode will be in your feed first thing when you are up in the morning. Coming up next week, we will climb into the top 40. We're also doing bonus episodes. As I mentioned earlier, we had a bonus episode talking about the 2018 Akron game. Shafe, you know what? I'll break this news on here. I haven't mentioned this except to a few people inside of the I-80 Club. Kevin Kugler is going to join me, and that will be a bonus subscriber episode. Patreon.com/I-80 Club if anybody would want to do that. He's going to join me mainly because the last college game that he called, I believe, Shafe, until last year, 2 years ago, was the 2019 Iowa loss by Nebraska. So we can talk about that kick to the groin with Kevin. We're trying to do bonus episodes once a week. We're going to do some Be Kind Husker Rewinds, which is when Jack and I, with our subscribers, rewatch games, and we're doing some real bad losses. So those will be coming up as well if you want to subscribe. And then the portion of the pods where Jack and I chat is always available on YouTube at youtube.com/@I80 Club. So those are the spots to get all the information. There are graphics and all sorts of stuff for every episode as well on huskermax.com. So we're doing the audio, the video, and the written word all over the place with this podcast. But at the very least, the I-80 Club YouTube page or podcast feed and YouTube page is where I would recommend people go.
All right. And if they want to hear more of you besides just groin kicks and losses, where can they find that?
Well, the I-80 Club, Jack and I do 2 pods a week, and it will be more as we get closer to the football season. We had a conversation, Jack and I did last night, with some of our subscribers about the new things we're cooking up for the football season. You make appearances from time to time. We talk some NFL together. And then, of course, my radio show on Sportsmanlike Conduct, which is on 2 to 6 every weekday on 1620 The Zone or on the internet, on YouTube. We're available all over the place. So pretty much all I do now is talk. I talk into microphones, sometimes at the office, sometimes at my home office. So very much appreciate you having me on to talk about the Chronicles today, Shafe, and spread the good news about the podcast series as we roll on towards the football season.
Spread the good news about getting kicked in the groin watching Nebraska football.
Indeed.
Over. Josh, appreciate your time today. Hopefully you have a wonderful holiday, this beautiful July 4th. We assume it's beautiful. We don't actually know.
Looks great outside to me.
Yeah, it does look nice out right now.
It's nice somewhere in America if it's not nice here.
Yeah, we're ending with some positivity. It's nice somewhere in America, even if it's not always nice on Saturdays in the fall here in Lincoln.
Indeed.
All right. For Josh Peterson, I'm Mike Shaver. You can get all of the Husker 247 content you want at Husker247.com.